views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey everybody, it is time for the Bronx Buzz. Nice to see you again. This is the program where we talk to Bronx journalists and all different editors and other people who take care of reporting on Bronx news to the people of the Bronx. You get a little insight as to who they are, what they're about, and what they're thinking about when they write what they do right. And tonight we're going to start off with my good friend David Cruz, editor of this newspaper, the Norwood News. And Dave, nice to see you again.
Thank you, Gary.
Always great to have you on the show. And let's start off. You have, boy, David is hard-hitting, I'll tell you, if nothing else. David had a good or an interesting editorial, you can decide if it's good, about the new speaker. Now, the speaker has been getting pretty good reviews from city council members who say, wow, he's empowering us, he's listening to us, it's not top-down. But you said not a good message, Mr. Speaker, over this community engagement unit. Why don't you, for folks who might not have seen it, first of all, go check it out. Second of all, explain what we're talking about.
Sure. So the community engagement unit was working it was formed under Mr. Johnson's predecessor, Melissa Mark Viverito, to help sort of engage community and ethnic media. For years, they've sort of been kind of like the stepchild within, the journalism circuit. And so Ms. Mark Viverito, in the hope of kind of getting the communities, ethnic communities, a little more engaged in what's happening with respect to New York City government, helped hire like 4 people who would interact with community and ethnic press. And so it worked well. They were there for about 4 years, and we were always kept up to speed of what was happening within New York City Council with respect to...
Let me just interject. So if we're talking about ethnic media, we're talking about El Diario, we're talking about even Dialogo here on BronxNet television.
But other community papers you probably haven't even heard of.
Right, and then community newspapers, of course, would include the Norwood News, the Riverdale Press, Mount Haven Herald, and those things as a way of engaging communities.
Correct.
So that those papers would get equal kind of information.
Right.
Before you go on, in what way did they engage with you? Because
they would hold a lot of roundtable discussions. Yeah, they would hold.
How come they never invited me? I'm in community media. My goodness gracious.
So they would have every couple of months, Ms. Mark Viverito would have an open, sort of on-the-record discussion on anything that was happening within the New York City Council.
In the council, or they would do it like electronically, or how would that work?
No, it would be in the council. It would be an invitation to speak.
I guess they never wanted to invite me.
Your invitation got lost in the mail.
I have to talk to her and ask her why. Okay, so they had this unit that was established by the previous speaker.
Exactly. And so then essentially about a month or maybe less than a month from when Mr. Johnson was sworn in, he cleaned house. He fired 4 staffers who had worked directly with community and ethnic press, and that kind of just left a little bit of a hole with respect to community and ethnic media having to reestablish kind of like a relationship with members of his office. And I just thought that it was a little bit of a slap in the face, because here, one day we just get an email out of the blue from Juana Ponce de Leon, who was like the sort of like the chief, speaker to like all these community and ethnic papers, said that it's been terminated. So,
what would the effect? To me, this is fascinating. As you know, we talk off camera all the time about the nature of media, the nature of covering the Bronx, et cetera, et cetera. What would the effect of that be on you and and your ability to do the reporting that you do, why do you need that? Why couldn't you just be like any reporter, for example, at the Daily News or the Times who covers City Hall?
I think because it kind of puts a little bit more of a burden on their press staff, to be honest with you. I mean, the thing is, these positions were created to work solely with the community and ethnic media.
I see.
So it and also kind of like helps them sort of understand that these are niche papers as opposed to these main, the daily papers that cover government solely.
So, and I really believe that people should really understand what it's about. So that and how that this is to me a fascinating discussion. So let's say you wanted to write a story about which you have, for example, about the 52nd precinct, and then you call City Hall and you want to get a statement. If you don't have that person in the community engagement unit to call, then you are basically in the same pool.
Correct.
To call the.
It just makes it harder. That's
right.
really what it is.
And then the way it plays out. Somebody who's dealing with the Times and Channel 4 and Daily News would say, oh, well, it's just the Norwood News. I don't have time for that. Or they may not understand what your coverage is about.
Correct.
And local. And so, okay, I've articulated it. Now you know. Go ahead.
Right. And so that sort of was a little bit of a slap in the face to the community and ethnic press that cover these communities, that do it with virtually almost little to no resources.
So has there been a result to this or a change, or really at this point you're on your own?
Well, I mean, I ended up getting a call from the press person for Mr. Johnson.
Oh,
kinda,
yeah?
just
Well, that's nice.
Seemed to be really upset by the editorial.
And how did they talk about their interest in serving you and your colleagues, or our colleagues?
Well,
I
of course,
should
they
say?
said that you could always reach out to our office
Right.
if we have any inquiries or.
But
what
so
have
that
you,
was your point to make that point.
Correct. Exactly.
Very good. Very good. We don't have enough people like David speaking out like that and telling it like it is. You did a story very recently, which I thought was interesting. There was many protests about the possibility of a shelter across from PSMS 20.
Right.
And there was a big protest, and there were community leaders out there. And now they've moved their plan to another location. The reason this is interesting to me is because it would suggest that if you protest, if you get your people together, if you have elected officials supporting your effort, you actually have a chance to make a change. I thought that was good news, that they moved from that location, I guess near Webster, all the way up to Jerome Avenue in
Yes.
a more desolate part of the neighborhood.
They did heed the calls from the community. That is very true. But what we're going to clarify it on the print version. I presume you saw it on the online version.
I did.
The site that they're looking to place a 200 men's homeless shelter is essentially abutting a school already. It's going to essentially be right next to a school.
Wait, is there a school over there? This is
Well,
on
that's the thing.
Jerome Avenue, the northern part of Jerome.
Right.
Folks who know the number 4 train right before it gets to the last stop of the 4
But the
train.
back of that building faces
On the other side, on I guess it's Bainbridge. Or
correct.
something.
It faces MS 208.
Oh, I didn't realize that. So it's.
I've reached out to the Department of Homeless Services. I mean, geographically, they're close to each other, but it would take a lot of effort to go all the way around the front of the building to the other
so
side.
It's still somewhat isolated, even though it's still in the same proximity.
Correct, exactly.
And FEGS went out, and so the building, I guess, at this point is open.
Yeah.
Why not?
Well, right, exactly. And the thing is, I think that was in the cards for months, simply because when I looked at paperwork from the Department of Buildings, there was a lot of activity. They had put in close to $1 million in renovations towards the building. And so clearly,
Also, there's one thing I like about that space. It has proximity to the train station.
Correct.
Now, if men who live in the shelter, I mean, we're not throwing them in the garbage. And
No.
if they need to get jobs or go to whatever it is they need to, even though it's not quite in the middle of a community, they still can be active and take care of their business.
So also, there
frankly.
seems to be like an established nonprofit. It's Bronx Works, who was given the contract by the Department of Homeless Services to actually go and operate the shelter. And
Right.
so they've been partnering with DHS.
Yeah,
forever.
well reputed. I mean, we all know the kinds of programs they run. That's a great thing. Dave, you had an interesting point of view about, speaking of schools, about JHS MS 80.
Right.
That there was an expose, a couple of them, in the New York Post. And when you came on here the last time, as I recall, you were hedging, and I think you even wrote a piece that there were people standing up for the school. You have yet, and I've been reading the paper.
It's the other, yeah.
Yes, you have a story in the paper that students came out to say, wait a minute, Mr. and Mrs. New York Post, things aren't as you believe them to be.
Right.
What's your assessment, and where are we at with JHS MS 80?
So on its surface, it is essentially a poorly rated school, but they're looking at it from a grade standpoint. But people don't really sort of ask themselves, why are these grades poor? The reason why is because this is a predominantly first-generation immigrant school. A lot of immigrant students come from immigrant families, and so the dominant language is not English at the home. It's a different language, and so you have kids who don't necessarily speak the language at home having to go ahead and take these rigorous tests from the state tests, and they are essentially receiving low marks. And the thing is, it's like you're asking a student to learn English, but also be able to conform to their standards. And so this is the reason why there's such low marks. But I want to just say that when I went to this meeting, there were students who said that I did not know how to speak English before I got to MS 80, but now I do. And
So there is some progress there, at least according to them.
Correct, exactly. And it was not a mandatory meeting for the students to go to. They went on their own.
They went on their own. So the principal, Emmanuel Polanco, has become somewhat of a central figure. The Post has fingered him as having just a significant amount of issues. How do you view that? Is that separate from the issue of the success of the school, or is that part of the whole picture?
No, I think that I've never spoken to Mr. Polanco directly, face to face. Everything's been through emails, and he's been trying to defend himself as best as he can. And usually, just as a reporter, when people come forward and they're willing to answer your questions, then chances are they're not trying to hide something, as opposed to someone who's just trying to avoid you completely. Right. He's trying to defend his reputation. Obviously, there have been a number of these lawsuits have been filed, or at least one of them have been filed against Polanco and the school. And he's trying his best to say, listen, just because it's a lawsuit doesn't necessarily mean that the other side
is true. It is automatically going to win. And of course, the Post would say those things to justify the articles that have been written.
Right.
I have seen this a number of times. In fact, I received a call from some parents in the South Bronx about schools that they felt the city was targeting and getting ready to close. One of them had told me that they criticized the school. They said enrollment is down in the school, and that's why we have to close it. They said, well, guess what? They capped our enrollment about 2 years ago. We couldn't bring in any more students. So it was almost like a fait accompli that they were getting ready to close the school. Do you think that's the case here, that the DOE is targeting? No, you think it's just that the Post uncovered something, heard from some people, maybe somebody with a grudge?
Well, that's what a lot of teachers were saying, that they knew the student who was quoted in that New York initial Post article, and said that that person was a troublemaker.
Wow, fascinating. One other story I thought of interest here was the story about the 52nd Precinct. We only have about a minute, so I'm going to ask you real quick. 52nd Precinct, there were allegations that the officers were not operating properly, were taking property and things like that. The commander denies it. What's next in this? I guess it would have to be a departmental judgment of some sort?
Well, the NYPD's Internal Affairs Unit is working with the Bronx DA's office to determine whether or not the officers had used sort of questionable tactics to get guns off the street by offering suspects deals, asking them where the gun is, but then slapping them with a gun charge anyway. Yeah. The deal was that, hey, I'm not going to give you a gun charge.
And then the minute they showed me where the gun was, I have to tell you, I actually saw that happen in the street once. I didn't follow the whole thing because, you don't want to kind of stand around there when somebody's getting searched and all that. But he was saying, listen, I'm going to go and find it. You better tell me where it is. And I don't know how it ended. Anyway, David Cruz, the Norwood News, it's a fine paper no matter what neighborhood you live in, because you'll learn something about our borough of the Bronx. And you are a great guest. We love having you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
All right, we're going to take a break. And his colleague from, let's say, Northwest in the Riverdale Press, the editor of the Riverdale Press, will join us on Skype in just a moment. Don't go away.
Sure, I look cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but thankfully I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self, and I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.
It's not always easy being a dad.
Do you have panda asthma too? Does that run in the family?
This is the home of the most priceless kung fu artifacts.
But when you make an effort,
Dad, we're not supposed to touch anything.
Oh, sorry. Go along, son!
it's always worth it.
Whoa! Master!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
I am gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov to learn more.
Oh my God, go! Oh, Shane, look out!
Hamilton was adopted from a rescue in 2008. He really likes to be around people. And as soon as I start to make my breakfast, Hamilton is right there. I get out my mat and I'm doing a downward dog and he's underneath. He's quite the pug about town. He gets invited to a lot of parties. He knows he's a pretty big deal. I mean, look at this little face. How could you not love him?
You think getting dumped by text is harsh? Try getting dumped by a tennis ball. My ex-owner drove me out to the woods, yelled fetch, and by the time I brought the ball back, he was gone. Yeah, I was pissed. But the folks at the shelter helped me let go of my anger. I learned coping skills, like taking it to the hole. Boom! Now I'm ready to fetch again. But how about I throw and you run and get it?
Thanks for coming in for the interview.
Oh, yeah, of course.
All right, we got your personal references, your resume, high school diploma or equivalent.
Skip the drama. Get your diploma.
Yes, it's right there.
Great.
Take that first step towards a better future. Find free adult education classes at finishyourdiploma.org.
We are there, day one, with baby names and a gift that lasts a lifetime. We are there as you grow, protecting you and those you love. And we are there as you start your next chapter. We are with you through life's journey. We are Social Security, securing today and tomorrow. Get to know us at socialsecurity.gov.
This video produced at U.S. taxpayer expense. Hey, it's Ava, and this is Tess from Vivo's Do It Yourselfie, where we recreate the hottest looks from today's biggest music videos.
After cleaning out our closet, we have a lot of clothes we don't wear anymore.
Like this old t-shirt.
It's not garbage, it's actually a brand new rug.
And to make it, all you need to do is cut, tie, and glue.
Cut the t-shirt into strips.
Tie the strips into knots.
And glue the knots to the bath mat. I love it. Give your garbage another life.
And recycle.
With you on the Bronx Buzz, and we go from one editor of a North Bronx paper to another editor of a North Bronx paper. It's my buddy Michael Hinman from the Riverdale Press. Nice to have you with us, Michael.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Always good. Lots to talk about. I got a quick glance at the newspaper yesterday. Let's talk about this body cam thing. It's a fascinating process because we have the footage available, but every time something happens, there seems to be an issue with people getting actually to look at the footage. The NYPD is holding it up. Where are we at now at the 5-0? Are they ready to do this and do it right?
Yeah, well, the 50th precinct here, they're planning on actually installing these cameras as early as, I believe they want to say like April or May is when they're trying to get them implemented. The entire New York Police Department has actually increased the they've actually sped up the time that they're implementing these cameras, but it's very costly, and it's not exactly for like one of those things like where where people can like if there's a beating or there's something else where the public gets access to it. I mean, the whole idea of having body cams is really designed for courts. It's designed for prosecutors. I mean, it's also designed to help internal affairs and such when there's issues involving cops, whether there's a complaint or not. So,
well, and I believe it's the Deborah Danner case is that they're talking about, there is footage, but nobody's actually seen it. And certainly in terms of the various allegations that are out there, what actually she did and, the way the police officer reacted, it certainly would be appropriate, I think, whether the public gets to see it or not, for everybody, for it to be out there and to be able to be analyzed. It's the same thing that we said many years ago when they talked about surveillance cameras in the street. It was basically, all right, you have them available. Who's going to get to see them? Can you call them up when you need them? That kind of thing. I think that process has worked. I think there's some kinks to be worked out in the police body cam process.
Yeah, I mean, and it's still, remember, this is still kind of a pretty new thing for the police department. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, you'd be lucky if, if they even had dash cams, which only just point forward from their car. So, I mean, this is still new technology, and I think that there's still a lot of things that have to be worked out. I mean, whether it's legally, we're talking about public right to know and everything else. And, and I think that we're going to have some type of balance struck between that right to know and then what's used in terms of policing the police, but also for prosecution of cases.
Yeah, and there's no question about it. It's an amazing tool. I forget the name of the person that got shot, but there was this very graphic one that we saw of somebody who resisted putting his hands down or dropping a gun, and the police did shoot him, and that was made available, and it was really something to see. I mean, it was like one of those cop shows, but in real life. You did a nice story about Manhattan College and diversity, the kind of thing I think that resonates all across the Bronx. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, our intern, who's actually a student at Manhattan College, Aaron Mayorga, actually really did this great piece about World Hijab Day that they had at Manhattan College. And of course, Manhattan College is, is primarily, a Catholic-based school. It's not, although they are, they welcome all religions and all faiths and stuff, but it's,
yes, it is a Catholic-based institution. There's no argument there.
Yeah, but I mean, this is kind of a way of, of opening up because, I mean, there is a lot of hostility towards Muslims, especially for women wearing hijabs. And it is really coming from both directions on people who don't think they should wear them, for people who have issues with Muslims and everything else. And it's a way, it's basically trying to put people in the shoes of those who goes in. It's like, when we go out and put ourselves in the shoes of people who have disabilities or other things that we don't really think about, like what they have to go through in their daily struggles and such. And and there are issues. I mean, because wearing a hijab is very visible, and I can only imagine some of the stuff that gets hurled at them.
So just to make it clear, and again, you can read about it in the Riverdale Press, what they did was they put people of all ethnicities in hijabs, and they moved about and kind of saw what it was like to be in somebody else's shoes.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's really what I'm trying to do.
Speaking of ethnicity, I mean, it's kind of a so-called hyper-local story, but you guys have followed it extensively, and that is this idea of the K Grill, which is a popular kosher restaurant, but I don't mean to laugh about it because this is significant, but it's kind of on the rocks because of some kind of interesting shenanigans. Why don't you recount some of that for us?
Yeah, I mean, K Grill is a restaurant. It's on Riverdale Avenue, like on the northern part of Riverdale Avenue, kind of in our kosher area, I guess you would say, which is right across the street from our offices here at the Riverdale Press. But the restaurant went up for sale by the owner late last year, which we covered that story because of some struggles with maintaining kosher certifications. But the owner has actually gone a step further than that and has filed a lawsuit against one of the certifying agencies and his landlord, claiming that they tried to interfere with his business, that they targeted him because because he says that, they put out that his wife wasn't Jewish. There's all kinds of issues there. And I mean, he's seeking millions of dollars in terms of trying to fix this.
So what is, I guess, ironic is that it wasn't a matter of the certification, wasn't a matter of measuring the food as being kosher or not kosher. They were actually measuring, allegedly, the family and the nature of their relationship. Seems a heck of a charge. Let's put it that way. Of course, courts will determine whether it's true or not.
Yeah, and the owner claims that there was that they were forced into pricing changes and everything else. And I mean, really, it's a lot of restaurants that are competing for SAR, which is a private Jewish school that's right next door, that's right across the street. So that's a big lunch crowd that they get from there. And I mean, and everybody's trying to compete for it.
Right. So I guess the implication is that there's some targeting going on as far as, somebody may favor one restaurant or another. To me, that would be very, very sad if there was something outside of the rule that was at play here. To me, it's like, can't we all just get along and play by the rules? Michael, we're essentially out of time. We love having you on the show. Everybody, make sure you pick up the Riverdale Press, read them online. They are award-winning for a very good reason. So we'll say thank you very much, Michael. And we will say to our friends and neighbors in the Bronx, thank you for joining us on the Bronx Buzz. We'll see you on Bronx Talk, which, of course, is every weeknight at 9 o'clock. And so good night.
Cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but thankfully I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self, and I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.